When my daughter handed me a box of cigars at my retirement dinner, she said, "These are for you, Dad." My son burst out laughing, mocking me in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that those cigars carried a secret that would flip his whole world upside down. By the end of that week, he was begging me for mercy. Justice had to be served. You won't believe what happened next. Stay till the end, and subscribe if you believe arrogance deserves payback. I live in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a quiet 2-story house with beige siding, a front porch swing, and a mortgage I finally paid off last year. At 67, most people think I'm just another retired old man who spends mornings reading the Columbus Dispatch and evenings watching reruns of Jeopardy! But let me tell you something, retirement doesn't erase who you used to be. For 35 years, I worked as an operations manager at a logistics company. I knew how to run people, run numbers, and run circles around competitors. That job gave me a good pension and a decent 401k. It also gave me enemies, and apparently, some resentment closer to home. See, I've got 2 kids. Emily, my daughter, 35, lives in Chicago with her husband and their picture-perfect Instagram life. She only calls me when she wants something. Then there's Ryan, my son, 32, a so-called entrepreneur who still lives 10 minutes away but never visits unless he needs to borrow a couple $100. The truth? Neither of them ever forgave me for divorcing their mother. She and I split when they were in middle school. I paid child support, paid for braces, helped with college loans, but in their minds, I abandoned the family. I've lived with that guilt long enough to just accept the coldness in their voices when they say, "Hi, Dad." So when Ryan planned a small retirement dinner for me at a steakhouse downtown, I was surprised. He said it was his treat, which I later found out meant he put the bill on my old Amex that he still somehow has a copy of. Classic Ryan. Anyway, that night, we sat in a private room with a dozen people, a few of my old coworkers, some neighbors, my pastor, and of course, both of my kids. Emily had flown in, which already put me on edge. She walked in late, wearing heels that clicked like gunshots against the hardwood floor, holding a wrapped box. When she set it in front of me, Ryan snorted like he couldn't hold back a joke. "These are for you, Dad," Emily said with this fake sweetness that made the hair on my neck stand up. Ryan smirked. "What, is it a carton of Ensure? Or maybe depends. Oh wait, cigars. He can't even smoke without coughing up a lung." Everyone laughed, everyone but me. I opened the lid, and sure enough, it was a pristine box of Cuban cigars. The kind you can't even buy legally here without pulling strings. My first thought wasn't joy, it was suspicion. Emily knew I quit smoking 10 years ago after my first heart scare. She also knew I loved cigars back in the day. So why this gift? The room filled with polite chatter, clinking glasses, and Ryan's loud stories. But I kept glancing at that box of cigars like it was a ticking bomb. Something about the way Emily smiled, too wide, too rehearsed, sent a chill straight through me. And I wasn't wrong. The box of cigars sat on my coffee table for 2 days like a dare. I didn't touch it. I didn't even open the seal after that night at the steakhouse. But Ryan came over the next afternoon, saw it, and laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "What's the matter, Dad? Afraid they'll give you cancer instantly," he said, slouching on my couch, sipping one of my sodas like it was his. "If you're not gonna smoke them, at least let me sell them. Guys at the bar would pay big money for Cubans." I told him no, those weren't going anywhere. He rolled his eyes. "God, you're impossible. No wonder Mom left." That one cut deeper than he realized. But Ryan never cared how sharp his words were, he only cared about what he could get from me. 2 days later, my neighbor Richard Haynes, Vietnam vet, gruff guy with a soft spot for football, stopped by. He spotted the cigars and his whole face lit up. "Well, I'll be damned, Carter. You holding out on me?" Normally, I'd laugh and offer him a beer. This time, though, I felt something odd in my gut. I told him the truth. Emily gave them to me. "You want them? They're just gonna sit there." He took one with a grin, right there in my living room, clipped it, lit it, and puffed. I swear, the moment that smoke curled up, the whole room felt wrong. 10 minutes later, Richard coughed so violently I thought he was choking. He collapsed before I could dial 911. At the hospital, they said it was poisoning. Rat poison. They pumped his stomach, and he survived, barely. I told the doctor where the cigar came from, but when the cops questioned me, I froze. How could I say my daughter tried to kill me without sounding insane? That was just the start. Over the next week, small things started happening around my house. My mailbox was left open, bills scattered. My tires mysteriously lost air, slow leaks, nothing dramatic. And Ryan kept showing up, pressing me about getting my affairs in order. He even tossed in the phrase power of attorney, like he just Googled it. Look, Dad, you're not getting younger. Why not let Emily or me help with your 401k, your pension paperwork, your will? You don't want to leave a mess for us when you go. When I go. Like my death was a scheduled event. I brushed him off, but the seed was planted. Someone was circling me, like vultures above a dying deer. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. Emily hosted in Chicago, and against my better judgment, I drove up. The whole spread looked perfect: turkey, cranberry sauce, stuffing, but I couldn't shake the dread. Halfway through dinner, Emily raised her glass. To Dad. May we always take care of him, and what he leaves behind. Everyone clinked glasses. Ryan laughed too loud. My stomach turned, not from the food but from the words. What he leaves behind. Not who he is. Not what he's done. Just what he leaves. Later that night, I walked out onto Emily's back porch for air. I heard her through the kitchen window, whispering to Ryan. We can't wait forever. The will isn't in order. If he dies suddenly, probate will eat half of it. Ryan muttered, then make it sudden. I nearly dropped the glass in my hand. My own children, plotting like I was just some obstacle between them and a check. I didn't confront them, not then. I smiled through dessert, hugged them goodnight, and drove back to Ohio in silence, the radio off, my chest pounding. From that day forward, everything felt like a countdown clock. I checked locks twice at night. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I met with my lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, who raised his eyebrows when I told him what I'd overheard. Jack, you need to document everything. If your kids are trying to manipulate you into signing away assets, the courts can intervene. But without evidence, it's just your word against theirs. Evidence. That's what I needed. But in the meantime, the injustices piled higher. Emily filed a petition behind my back claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my finances. Ryan spread rumors at church that I was losing it, forgetting things, mixing up dates. Even my pastor asked gently if I was okay. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were building a case to erase me. And I'll admit it, for the first time in years, I felt truly old. Not because of my age, but because my own blood had decided I was expendable. But what they didn't know. I'd been underestimated before. And I still had fight left in me. A week after Thanksgiving, the local VA hospital called me. They'd received word about Richard's cigar incident and wanted me to bring in the box for testing. I almost said no, why drag my kids into an investigation? But then I remembered Emily's whisper in the kitchen, make it sudden. So I drove the 2 hours up to Cleveland, handed the cigars over to the lab, and waited. 2 days later, I got the call. Mr. Carter, the toxicologist said, those cigars were laced with bromadiolone. It's a potent rat poison. Whoever tampered with them knew what they were doing. If you'd smoked even half, you wouldn't be here today. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the receiver. My hand shook, not from fear but from fury. My daughter's smiling face at that retirement dinner flashed before me, and suddenly I saw it differently, not a gift but a loaded gun. Still, I didn't rush to the cops. If I accused Emily now, she'd deny it, spin the narrative, maybe even flip it on me. That's when I realized I couldn't just defend myself. I needed to go on offense. The first crack in their plan came sooner than expected. Ryan stopped by again, swaggering as usual, and said, Dad, we're serious about helping. Emily already talked to an attorney about guardianship. If you don't cooperate, the court might appoint someone anyway. Guardianship. The word chilled me. They were trying to strip me of my independence legally. But instead of arguing, I played dumb. Maybe you're right, son, I said, lowering my eyes. Maybe I do need help. But let's take it slow, okay? Let me think it over. For the first time in months, Ryan looked satisfied. He thought he'd won. That night, I pulled an old leather binder from the back of my closet. Inside were bank statements, deeds, investment notes, everything I'd kept since my contracting days in the 90s. And tucked at the very back was something I hadn't thought about in years: a copy of a property deed in Montana, land I'd bought cheap during the recession. 50 acres of untouched forest, now worth nearly $1 million. I almost laughed. My kids didn't even know it existed. They thought my modest Ohio house and a dwindling pension were all I had. And suddenly, I had leverage. The next day, instead of meeting Ryan for lunch like he wanted, I drove to see my old buddy from the Air National Guard, Hank. He runs a security company now, private investigations, surveillance, the works. When I told him about the cigars, his jaw tightened. "Jack, this is attempted murder, plain and simple. You need evidence before you walk into court. Lucky for you, that's my specialty." Within a week, Hank had wired my house with discreet cameras and voice-activated recorders. He even coached me on how to bait Ryan and Emily into talking. And boy did they. At Christmas, when Emily came over with a tin of cookies, she pressed me again about updating my will. "Dad, we just don't want things to get messy. If something happened tomorrow, probate would eat half. Don't you want your family taken care of?" I played frail, sighing. "You might be right. Maybe after New Year's." Her eyes gleamed, and Hank's recorder captured every word. That was the light twist, the moment I realized I wasn't the hunted anymore. I was setting the trap. But it didn't end there. At New Year's Eve service at church, Ryan pulled me aside in the parking lot, his breath fogging in the cold. "Dad, look. Emily's impatient. If you don't sign soon, she'll make things happen. You don't want that." I froze, heart pounding, but forced myself to nod. I understand. What he didn't know was that Hank had bugged my key fob. Every threat, every scheme, was being logged and backed up. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. Because I knew one thing: my kids thought they were circling their prey, but really? They'd walked straight into my ambush. The morning after New Year's, I stood in my garage, staring at the old duffel bag tucked away behind boxes of Christmas lights. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were medals, commendations, and faded photographs from my years with the Air National Guard. To anyone else, it just looked like memorabilia. To me, it was a reminder of a life my kids never cared to understand. Ryan and Emily always saw me as just Dad, a washed-up contractor who barely scraped by after Mom died. They never asked about my deployments, or why people in town still stopped to shake my hand. They never knew the full truth. Because I never told them. The truth was, back in the late 80s and early 90s, I wasn't just hanging drywall and pouring concrete. I ran one of the largest veteran-owned construction companies in the Midwest. We built schools, hospitals, government facilities, projects worth millions. At one point, I had 120 employees and contracts stretching from Ohio to Pennsylvania. But with success came enemies. A crooked business partner siphoned money, cut corners, and left me holding the bag. When the lawsuits came crashing down, I had a choice: fight it out in court for years or sell everything to protect what mattered most, my wife and 2 kids. So I cashed out. Quietly. I sold off properties, closed the company, and used shell LLCs to buy long-term investments. Most folks thought I went broke. Even my own children believed that narrative because I never corrected them. Why? Because back then, Ryan was in high school, already bragging about fast cars and easy money. Emily was chasing fashion brands and talking about marrying rich. I knew if they saw the real numbers in my accounts, they'd bleed me dry before they even hit 30. So I let them underestimate me. And it worked. For decades, they thought I was just Dad with a pension. Meanwhile, the Montana land, some blue-chip stocks, and a quiet 401k rollover grew untouched. By the time I retired, I wasn't just comfortable, I was sitting on almost $2.5 million in hidden assets. But money wasn't the whole story. During my Guard years, I worked on classified projects after September 11th, construction for secure facilities. That's where I learned the power of leverage, the importance of documentation, and how to read people. Skills that don't disappear just because you trade your uniform for jeans. So when Hank set up those surveillance tools, it wasn't foreign to me. I'd done similar things decades earlier, just under Uncle Sam's paycheck. The only difference? Back then, I was protecting my country. Now I was protecting myself, from my own flesh and blood. The deeper reveal came 2 weeks later when Hank and I sat in his office going over the audio logs. Ryan and Emily weren't just plotting guardianship, they were talking about liquidating assets. The house is worth maybe $200,000, but Dad's VA benefits could be transferred to help with assisted living. If we push guardianship through, we'll control all that. Plus, he's got that land title somewhere. I heard him mention Montana years ago. That line made my blood run cold. They did remember. The Montana land was the crown jewel of my hidden portfolio. And they weren't just sniffing around it, they were planning to take it. Hank leaned back, arms crossed. Jack, you realize what this means? They're not just greedy, they're organized. This is elder financial abuse in the making. Courts take that seriously. With these recordings, you could bury them legally. I nodded, but a wave of sorrow hit me. This wasn't just about assets. This was about my own children plotting my downfall. And for what? A quicker payday? That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, staring at the snow-covered yard. My late wife, Linda, would have been devastated. She believed in family above all else. She thought raising kids in a modest, disciplined home would teach them gratitude. But instead, they grew entitled, spoiled by the comfort my sacrifices gave them. And I had enabled it, by hiding who I really was. I thought about the irony. All those years I spent outsmarting contractors, lawyers, and government inspectors, only to be blindsided by my own kids. It stung worse than any battlefield wound. But as the bourbon warmed my chest, a calm settled in. I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity. For too long, I'd let Ryan and Emily narrate who I was, the fragile old man, the washed-up contractor. But that wasn't me. Not then. Not now. The past reveal wasn't just for the audience. It was for myself. I pulled the Montana deed out of my binder, held it up to the light, and whispered, "You thought I was done. But you forgot who raised you." The next morning, I called Hank. "Get the paperwork ready. It's time I stop hiding." Because if my kids wanted a war over my legacy, they were about to learn the first rule of strategy one mastered decades ago: never underestimate the quiet man. The week after I pulled out that Montana deed, everything moved fast. Hank filed the first motions quietly, setting up protective orders and freezing any attempt Ryan or Emily might make to petition the court for guardianship. But the real game began at Sunday dinner. It wasn't Thanksgiving, it wasn't Christmas, it was just a simple pot roast at my place. I invited them both over, along with Emily's boyfriend, Trevor, who worked in finance. They thought it was just Dad being lonely and wanting company. In reality, it was my stage. When they walked in, Ryan immediately made a face. "Geez, Dad, still got that old TV? You know flat screens are like $300 on Black Friday." I smirked. "Well, son, some things get better with age. Unlike your student loans." He rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath. Emily, meanwhile, complimented the food in that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Halfway through dinner, I cleared my throat. "So, kids, I've been doing some estate planning. Making sure things are clear before, time catches up." That perked them right up. Forks froze mid-air. Ryan leaned in. "Estate planning? Like wills and stuff?" "Exactly," I said, sipping my sweet tea. "And guardianship discussions. Seems you've both been a little curious about my affairs." Their faces drained of color. Emily stammered, What do you mean?" "We just want what's best for you." That's when Hank, who I'd invited under the guise of an old poker buddy, pulled out his tablet. He set it on the table, hit play, and suddenly the room was filled with Ryan's voice. "The house is worth maybe $200,000, but Dad's VA benefits could be transferred to assisted living. If we push guardianship, we'll control it all. Plus, that Montana land, he's hiding something there." Ryan's jaw dropped. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. "You two plotted in whispers. Problem is, walls have ears. And in America, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse? That carries weight in court." Trevor looked like he'd seen a ghost. Jesus, Emily, what the hell? Emily sputtered. Dad, we didn't mean, we were just what? I cut her off. Just scheming to strip me of my rights? To bleed me dry before I'm even in the ground. The silence was so thick you could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. Ryan finally snapped, slamming his hand on the table. You're blowing this out of proportion. You can't prove anything. Oh, but I can. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were notarized deeds, account statements, and most importantly, a copy of the motion Hank had filed. See, I'm not the broke old man you thought I was. I've been careful. Smarter than you gave me credit for. And now, thanks to your greed, I have enough evidence to make sure you'll never see a dime without earning it. Emily's eyes welled up. Dad, please, we were scared. We thought you couldn't handle things anymore. Funny, I said, my voice low but firm, because I've handled more than you'll ever know. You thought those cigars were just a joke. But they were a message. A reminder that I still have fire left. Ryan pushed back his chair, pacing like a caged animal. This is insane. You can't just, actually, Hank cut in, he can. The court takes this very seriously. If he wanted, he could press charges tomorrow. Fraud, coercion, elder exploitation. Do you really want your names dragged through the mud in front of a judge? That shut him up. His bravado evaporated. For once, Ryan had no comeback. I leaned forward, locking eyes with both of them. Here's what's going to happen. I'm not cutting you off. Yet. But things are going to change. You'll start respecting me, not because I demand it, but because I've earned it. And if you so much as breathe wrong about my assets again, I'll drag you into court myself. Emily broke down, sobbing into her napkin. Ryan sat frozen, his fork clattering to the floor. I stood, placing both hands on the table. You thought you could make me the weak old man. But you forgot, I built this life from the ground up. I buried friends, fought wars, raised a family, and survived betrayal. You? You've survived credit card debt and TikTok trends. Don't test me. The room was silent except for Emily's muffled cries. Even Trevor looked ashamed just being there. As I cleared the dishes, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. For once, I wasn't reacting to their disrespect. I was leading. The reversal wasn't just in the evidence or the legal leverage. It was in the balance of power. Ryan left without a word, his face pale as ash. Emily hugged me before she went, whispering through tears, I'm sorry, Dad. But whether it was guilt or fear of losing her inheritance, I couldn't tell. When the door shut and the house was quiet again, Hank chuckled. You sure you don't want to press charges? You'd win. I shook my head, pouring myself a bourbon. Not yet. Sometimes letting them stew in shame is worse than a courtroom sentence. As I sipped, I realized this was only the beginning. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in years, the battlefield was mine. And my children had just learned the lesson every hustler, every con, every greedy fool eventually learns in America: never underestimate a man who's been underestimated his whole life. The fallout came quicker than I expected. Within a week, word had spread through our small Indiana town. Turns out, when your kids try to push a guardianship order on you just to get their hands on your house, people talk. The folks at church gave me those sympathetic looks, neighbors whispered behind hedges, and even the HOA president, who usually nags me about my lawn length, stopped by just to say, Jack, you handled that like a champ. Funny how fast the tide turns when the truth comes out. Ryan called a few days later. He didn't apologize, of course. That's not his style. Instead, he launched into how his boss cut his hours, how bills were stacking up, how he needed a little financial help just to get through the month. I let him talk. Then I said, Son, I gave you life, food, and 18 years of a roof over your head. What you do after that is on you. If you want money, earn it. If you want respect, show it. And then I hung up. For once, the silence on the other end felt like victory. Emily came by in person. No makeup, hair messy, eyes red from crying. She actually fell to her knees in my living room, begging me not to press charges. She admitted Trevor broke up with her the night of the dinner, said he didn't want to be tied to someone that shady. That cut her deeper than anything I could have said. I didn't gloat. I just told her, you've got two options. Keep crying about what you almost had, or stand up and rebuild your life. I'm not your enemy, Emily. But I won't let you treat me like a bank ever again. She nodded through tears, and for the first time in years, I believed she actually heard me. Legally, Hank had everything squared away. The Montana land was secured in a trust, the house had a clause preventing any sale without my approval, and my 401k was moved into an account with strict beneficiary rules. Even if my kids tried, they couldn't touch a dime without facing a judge. That alone gave me more peace of mind than I'd had in a decade. But the real justice wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the way people started looking at me differently. At the VFW hall, a younger vet slapped me on the back and said, "Heard you put your kids in their place." Damn right. Too many folks let themselves get steamrolled once they hit retirement. Even the lady at the grocery store, who used to ask if I needed help carrying bags, now said, "You've still got fight in you, Mr. Thompson. Good for you." It wasn't about pride, it was about reclaiming my dignity. The final touch came 2 weeks later at Emily's birthday dinner. She invited me, said she wanted to make amends. I almost didn't go, but Hank convinced me. Sometimes closure doesn't come from slamming doors, Jack. It comes from opening one. So I went. Halfway through, she stood up, raised her glass, and said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I disrespected you. I let greed cloud my love. But tonight, I want everyone here to know, I'm proud to be your daughter. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." The room applauded softly. Ryan wasn't there, still sulking somewhere, but I didn't care. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Actions speak louder than words. Show me you mean it." That was enough. Driving home, windows down in the cool Indiana night, I lit one of those cigars. The ones Emily once handed me with a smirk, thinking I was too old, too weak, too finished. I puffed slow, the smoke curling into the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not because my kids finally respected me. Not because I won some legal battle. But because I remembered who the hell I was. I wasn't just some retiree waiting around to die. I was Jack Thompson, veteran, father, fighter, survivor. And from that night on, no one, family or not, was ever going to underestimate me again. When the dust settles, what's left isn't the money, the land, or even the cigars. It's dignity. Too often in America, we're taught to measure worth by net worth, 401ks, mortgages, shiny cars parked in the driveway. But the truth is, the most valuable thing you can hold onto isn't an asset, it's self-respect. Jack's story reminds us of something every generation eventually learns. Love without respect is manipulation, and family without trust is just paperwork. Blood alone doesn't entitle anyone to ownership of your life. Respect is earned, not inherited. In a culture that prizes independence, it's easy to forget that boundaries aren't cold, they're healthy. Setting legal safeguards, standing up in court, saying no to even your own children, that's not cruelty. That's survival. Jack showed us that protecting your peace doesn't make you heartless, it makes you strong enough to live without resentment. There's also a lesson about legacy here. A true legacy isn't just land in Montana or a retirement fund, it's the way people remember you when you're gone. Do they remember you as someone they could bully into silence, or as someone who stood tall, even when the closest people tried to break him? That choice belongs to each of us, every single day. Maybe you're watching this and thinking about a toxic sibling, a manipulative parent, or even a so-called friend who only shows up with their hand out. Let this be your sign, you are not obligated to shrink yourself for anyone. Walking away from toxic love isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. At the end of the day, cigars burn out, money gets spent, property changes hands. But self-worth? That's forever. And no one, family or not, has the right to strip it away. So remember this. The sharpest revenge isn't screaming or fighting, it's living well on your own terms without apology.